February 20th, 2008, the U.S. Navy cruiser Lake Erie departs Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, with 360 sailors aboard on an unprecedented mission.
Got them together and I said, I can't tell you what we're going to do, but we're going to have to go do something that's really important.
When I first found out the specifics of what we were trying to accomplish, I was like, no way. Holy mackerel, you know, we never trained for that before.
You got to be crazy, you know, we're not designed to do that.
Could not see that coming. Way out of the blue.
The Lake Erie's mission is to shoot down USA-193, a defective spy satellite on a collision course with Earth and carrying 1,000 pounds of deadly toxic fuel.
The nature of this was global. The nature of this was international.
No matter what kind of calculation we did, we couldn't mitigate that risk to humans here on Earth, not to the point that we could just turn our back.
If you have the capability of stopping something from happening that has a probability of causing harm, and you don't take action, can you live with yourself? Can you live with the consequences?
By 4:30 p.m. local time, the Lake Erie's in position and gets the order to fire.
Launch in 5, 3, 4, 2, 1.
The whoosh of the launcher is what made it different this time, and it puts a pretty good rumble and shake through the ship, and you definitely know it leaves.
The launch is successful, but there's no guarantee the missile will hit the wobbling bird, tumbling through space at 17,000 miles per hour.
And that's the longest, probably 2.5, 3 minutes of your life is when you're waiting there.
That was really kind of the nervous point of the whole mission.
Here it comes. It's looking.
It's got it.
It's looking. It's looking.
KWJ. Time to intercept, 23 seconds.
Come on, baby. Come on. Lock. Lock.
Only seconds to go before knowing if they've hit the target. Yet it will be longer still before they know if they've succeeded in their mission. Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, December 14th, 2006. USA-193, a high-resolution radar spy satellite, is launched aboard a Delta II rocket.
We have liftoff.
Yet as it reaches orbit, ground controllers lose contact with the satellite. USA-193 is now on its own. Despite attempts to regain control of it, the satellite orbits the Earth for nearly a year, closely monitored by the U.S. Strategic Command, STRATCOM, in Omaha, Nebraska.
193 was just a dead satellite, and through the course of time, all bodies in space that are not held in space by their own power will degrade that orbit and eventually come back down into the atmosphere.
Most satellites that return to Earth go through a controlled re-entry that for safety and security reasons sends them crashing into the ocean. The task is difficult because of the number of satellites, both working and defective, that orbit the Earth. To date, as many as 3,000. Add to that another 600,000 pieces of non-working hardware, called space debris, zipping around Earth at over 15,000 miles per hour.
When you understand the number of satellites that we track, the number of pieces of space debris, that there are some amazing calculations that are done every day just to protect the International Space Station, protect the shuttle when she goes up, and as many of those pieces of debris that we can avoid, of course, we're going to do that. There's a lot of space debris that we track, and not only that, we move our satellites out of the way of that space debris if we can.
Congestion in space is one thing, but the re-entry of USA-193 presented another problem.
She's carrying about 1,000 pounds of what we call hydrazine, which is satellite fuel. Once we determined that that hydrazine was still in that dead satellite, we started looking at the risk that satellite posed to humans here on Earth.
Hydrazine is a colorless, toxic liquid fuel with an ammonia-like odor. Short-term exposure to it can produce a range of reactions, from minor irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat to dizziness and nausea. In the worst cases, it can cause seizures, coma, even death.
Now, when we process that fuel on the ground, we completely encapsulate the technicians in suits, almost like spacesuits, so that they are protected from the toxic vapors of that fuel. So that is the degree to which we go to in protection on the ground and the folks that have to routinely handle this substance. So you can have an impression as to why we were so concerned about the toxicity to an unprotected public.
1,000 pounds of unused hydrazine barreling uncontrollably toward Earth was a real threat.
The concern was that this had become very cold and very frozen while on orbit, and it would survive re-entry. It would heat during re-entry, And then that heating process, it would be creating liquid and slush and vapor with respect to the hydrazine. Then if it were to impact a populated area, the tank would rupture upon impact, and then you would have individuals exposed to the toxic fuel and toxic vapor.
By December 2007, analysis indicated the satellite would crash to Earth by early March 2008. With oceans covering over 70% of the Earth's surface, chances were likely it would land in water somewhere.
We couldn't be sure. It's not an exact science. There's no model that's going to say it's going to land here on this date at this precise time. It just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't exist.
The analysis also calculated the odds of human casualties resulting from the hydrazine fuel tank rupturing.
It varied depending on which expert you talk to, but anywhere from 1 in 45 to 1 in 25 chance of that occurring. Those seem like small odds, but in the business that we're in our testing, for example, we will actually make a change in our test profiles if there's a possibility of any debris coming back in that could cause anything greater than a 1 in 10,000 chance of a casualty. So by our business, that was an unacceptable risk.
Also unacceptable was the risk of letting the satellite fall to Earth without taking any action.
Even though we've had thousands of pieces of space debris come into the atmosphere, we've never had one carrying 1,000 pounds of hydrazine, and no matter what kind of calculation we did, we couldn't mitigate that risk to humans here on Earth, not to the point that we could just turn our back.
That was the president's conclusion after a secret White House briefing. The satellite would have to be intercepted before reaching Earth.
The president determined that we just couldn't not pursue this with the thought that if we injured one human life on Earth and had a capability to engage this satellite and did nothing, then we would be held pretty responsible for that.
At the Missile Defense Agency, the job of reviewing possible missile intercept options fell to Lieutenant General Henry Obering.
And we started looking at what were the capabilities with our silo-based long-range interceptors, what we call our ground-based interceptors, the GBIs. We also looked at our terminal high altitude area defense interceptors, the THAAD, to see if they had any capability against the satellite.
Obering also wanted to know if the Navy's Aegis ballistic missile defense system could do the job. He contacted Rear Admiral Brad Hicks, the Navy's Aegis program director.
We had to understand the object we were going after, its physical dimensions, its orbit characteristics, which is called ephemeris data. We had to build up that body of knowledge to then link what we thought were within our capabilities and what we could modify the capabilities to do. The analysis said it's feasible. So we went back and reported, yes, it's feasible.
Obering chose the Aegis sea-based option for the mission.
They were the easiest to modify because of the simplicity of the current kill vehicle that we have deployed.
It was on a mobile platform. We were able to position the launch platform in an optimal location to both have the best shot of intercepting the satellite as well as knowing where the debris would go.
Modifying the Aegis ballistic missile system to shoot down a satellite was technically feasible, but there were still challenges ahead.
Now, big difference between feasibility and execution. That's a big leap.
A big leap that many believed could save lives if it could be done quickly. In early January 2008, an out-of-control U.S. spy satellite carrying 1,000 pounds of frozen toxic fuel was 2 months away from crashing to Earth. The fear was that the heat of re-entry could cause the fuel, called hydrazine, to melt in the satellite's storage tank. Depending on where the satellite hit, the tank could burst open.
It hits the ground, breaches. There's a mixture of ice, an icy liquidish substance that's going to evaporate pretty quickly, and only takes a very small part in the atmosphere to put risk to human life.
The plan is to launch a Navy missile and intercept the satellite before it enters the Earth's atmosphere. It would involve modifying the Navy's Aegis ballistic missile defense system, the sea-based component protecting the United States from incoming missile attacks. Aegis warships equipped with SM-3 have the capability to destroy incoming threats at ranges of hundreds to thousands of miles and at altitudes as high as 300 miles above the Earth's atmosphere. Radar on board detects and tracks the threat target. The computer-based weapon system calculates an interception point and what kind of missile to use, then launches a missile aimed at destroying the target, not by using explosives, but instead by the sheer force of the collision. That force is equivalent to a 10-ton truck hitting a wall at 600 miles an hour.
The satellite is moving extremely fast. I think it's something in the vicinity of 17,000 to 18,000 miles an hour. And so what you're basically doing is you're having a collision in space of two massive vehicles. The kill vehicle itself is not that massive, but the what we call the closing velocity, or the relative speed that the two intercept in space, is so high that you have this transfer of energy that basically turns the products into small pieces, if not plasma. And they're just almost vaporized together because the energy generated is tremendous.
People talk about in missile defense the difficulty of hitting a bullet with a bullet, but I will tell you that where we are with the technology today, we can do better than that. We can hit a spot on a bullet with a bullet, and that's actually what we do in our missile defense test.
Since 1999, the Navy has tested its Aegis system using an interceptor called Standard Missile 3, or SM-3. By January 2008, the SM-3 had succeeded in intercepting 12 of 14 test missiles, proving a versatile, high-velocity weapon.
There's 4 stages on the SM-3 missile. The first stage is a Mark 72 booster, and it basically is designed to get the missile away from the ship. It's a fairly short burn, followed by the dual thrust rocket motor, the Mark 104, which basically flies us out of the atmosphere. About the time we're clearing the atmosphere and losing aerodynamic control, we drop that second stage, and we have a third stage rocket motor that takes over, and this was with its own reaction control system. All this time we're getting updates from the ship as the TISRM, a third stage rocket motor, completes its second firing. Those updates from the ship are provided to the fourth stage, or the kill vehicle, or kinetic warhead, which has its own targeting sensor. It's got an infrared detector on it, and it will detect the target and then eject from that third stage, and it homes on the target. And as we close on the target, we make decisions to hit it in the lethal point.
Yet while successful in anti-missile testing, the Aegis system has never been used against a satellite.
The system is not built for this mission set. It's meant to go after a missile or an aircraft. In fact, the weapon system is hardwired. We have coded into it not to go after space objects, such as satellites.
Shooting down USA 193 would mean bringing together a team of experts and scientists from across the military, government labs, and the defense industry. The team would have to reconfigure the Aegis system and the SM-3 interceptor for a mission less than 8 weeks away.
And our initial reaction was, you got to be crazy. You know, we're not designed to do that. We need to know a lot of things if we're going to do that. And after a while, it started to settle in that, wow, this is a challenge.
There was a certain amount of risk that we knew we had going into this mission, or going into the execution of the mission, given the time frame that we had and the work that had to be accomplished.
We had to literally get the engineering changes done in about 3 weeks. That wasn't much time. It would be an understatement to say that there was frenetic level of activity those first few weeks.
Frenetic activity was occurring in complete secrecy at key facilities across the country responsible for the Aegis weapon system, like Lockheed Martin at Morristown, New Jersey.
It quickly evolved into a 24/7 operation. We did not have our full teams here in Morristown working on it, and neither did anyone else, because of the nature of the mission. We kept it to a small set of people. So that small set had to do more and did it around the clock.
Also working around the clock were the SM-3 missile teams at Raytheon in Tucson, Arizona.
We had a very short time frame. January 4th came around. They says, we want you to go do this, and oh, by the way, we want the missiles ready in the first week in February. And that was a shock to all of us on how we would do it. A lot of people thought we couldn't do it.
We stood up 3 teams. One was a performance and simulation team. They were working to upgrade our simulation models to represent this target and the missile that we've designed to show how it would perform in this mission arena. We stood up a design team to work down through the nuts and bolts and the design of the missile to see if there's anything, in the details that would cause issue or concern with this kind of mission. And then we stood up also a hardware team to work through the details of the preparations to pull the missiles from inventory and load new software in and get them re-prepped for this mission and deployed out to the fleet.
The Aegis system had to be retooled to see a satellite as a potential target.
We had to go into the system and say, okay, if it is a space object we are still interested in. So that was step number one. Then we had to make sure we did everything we needed to do to make sure that we acquired the correct space object.
After finding USA 193, now there was another task.
This object was traveling about 3 times faster than any object we had previously attempted to engage. And that brought in unique challenges for the radar when we could acquire the object and convert it from a track of interest to an engageable track and then launch the missile.
Overall, the strategy called for intercepting the satellite just above the Earth's atmosphere to increase the chances of bringing it down in an unpopulated area.
So we wanted to intercept as low as we possibly could, between 200 and 300 kilometers, which is in the end game before the satellite really becomes unpredictable in its orbit. The altitude deviations as the satellite goes around the Earth become larger the closer the satellite gets to Earth.
Once you get down around 210 kilometers above the Earth, you start picking up the effects of the Earth's gravity and what we call solar winds above the atmosphere that cause your predictions of the orbit to change.
While this would be the first shoot-down attempt by a seagoing vessel, this was not the first time a satellite had been shot from the sky. In 1985, a U.S. fighter jet destroyed a U.S. missile by firing a modified air-to-air missile from an altitude of 80,000 feet. But that mission was different than shooting down USA 193.
That was an anti-satellite test that was actually conducted by the Air Force to determine the feasibility of doing that with an airborne platform and an airborne missile. This was not a test of an anti-satellite capability because we had to modify our interceptors, the radar on board the ship, as well as the fire control system on the ship, as well as integrate other sensors into the ship's weapons control system to affect the mission.
More recently, in January 2007, China used a land-based missile to destroy a 2,200-pound weather satellite orbiting 528 miles above the Earth. Despite the fact that China destroyed its own satellite, protests from the world community centered on the resulting debris.
The higher the intercept, the more debris is generated that will last longer in terms of orbital debris, which is the concern, is the longevity of the debris. Now, if you look at the Chinese, first of all, they intercepted very high in their orbit, greater than 800 kilometers, and that debris is much more persistent in terms of damage to orbiting objects that it could cause.
There will be space debris in orbit for the next 100 years after the Chinese anti-satellite attempt. It's very high. It poses a great risk to any of us that go into space. It poses a huge risk to our satellites that we depend on every day. In many regards, they could have demonstrated something like that much differently. So we're going to live with that debris, and it's going to affect everyone that's in space.
Meanwhile, USA 193 was on a trajectory hurtling wildly toward Earth. Success of the shoot-down mission depended not only on hitting the satellite, but on destroying the tank containing the hydrazine fuel. That meant there were long hours ahead for those on the shoot-down mission team, and little time to waste. In mid-January 2008, a wayward U.S. spy satellite with a half-ton of toxic fuel was 6 weeks away from crashing to Earth. Across the U.S., teams of government researchers, defense industry engineers, and military personnel were secretly working on a plan to shoot down the satellite before it hit. First, they had to convert the Navy's Aegis anti-ballistic weapons system into an anti-satellite system.
In
general, with a ballistic missile target, you understand the trajectory is sort of dictated to you by where it's launched and when it burns out, and then it just follows a ballistic path to its impact point. With a satellite, once it's launched and sent into orbit, there is no impact point. It's intended to stay in orbit for a number of years. In this case, we had a decaying orbit, so it was going to have an impact point. So the difference is, how do I modify the system to deal with that different situation?
Modifications that would normally take up to 4 years to do had to be done in 3 weeks. Experts at Lockheed Martin worked on the Aegis weapon system software, while those at Raytheon worked on the SM-3 missile. Scientists and engineers from the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and MIT's Lincoln Labs were brought in to help.
You had to deal with issues that were built into the system to prevent us from what we were doing.
There wasn't a lot of information available about what the satellite was doing. And so we had to develop that and do a lot of that analysis in real time.
We were finding out is that, yes, we could hit the satellite, but could we hit it in the right spot? Because in our basic design with ballistic missiles, we go after the warhead or the payload. So for this one, which is an unusual shape, a satellite, much bigger than what we've ever gone at before, we had to take that into consideration, the odd shape, in order to go to the right place that we wanted to hit. And the area we wanted to hit was the hydrazine tank.
The satellite's size and shape weren't the only considerations. It also flew higher and 3 times faster than targets the Aegis system was designed to intercept. Plus, the satellite emitted no heat, which made the SM-3's infrared detector useless.
So we had to look at what that meant for us in the design of the missile. It meant we wanted to hit the tank on this one, so we spent an awful lot of time building very specific, or as specific as we can be, models of in imagery models of what that target looks like, so that we can run many simulations at various angles of approach to make sure that there's nothing in that imagery that would cause us to sway off the target or cause a problem.
The 3-week time frame left little margin for error. Navy personnel were also involved. Every waking moment was given over to the mission, collecting and inputting data, running simulations, analyzing outcomes, and revising them.
A lot of the analysis that the team had to do was figure out what the satellite was doing at a particular time, and then how the system would react, how everything would come together to engage the satellite successfully.
Every day we came in, we called it Monday, because that's the way it was. It was as if every day was a Monday. And of course, Mondays are the longest days of the week.
It wasn't until we got down into the details specifically of the way the missile operated that we had a couple of changes that we identified that had to be made in order to just make sure that the software would be able to fly smoothly and intercept at the specific point we wanted to hit the target.
After 3 weeks, the teams finished the work of modifying the Aegis system and the SM-3 interceptor. Finished to a point.
In the end, we didn't know to 100% whether we could do this and breach that hydrazine fuel tank, because there were still variables that we couldn't figure out and close.
Still, modifying the system and the interceptor was only part of the task. 3 Aegis-equipped ships, the USS Lake Erie, the USS Decatur, and the USS Russell, were selected for the mission. The USS Lake Erie, the Chief Naval Operations Ballistic Missile Test Ship, would be the one to attempt the shoot-down, which meant its crew would have to be retrained for this one-time-only mission.
And we had to do a mind shift, because the guys have been trained one way, and we're giving them a whole new capability, temporary capability, and it's a big mindset and a big paradigm shift. So we had to understand it ourselves and be able to project that to the sailors to make sure this is not the same system that you've been working on before. Unique capabilities, and we had to ensure that things were done correctly.
The 3 ships had their existing Aegis weapon systems disabled and replaced with new computer program media for the mission. Aboard the USS Lake Erie, Captain Randall Hendrickson oversaw days of mission rehearsals, done in complete secrecy.
It's scenarios where we practice everything from shots that go the way they're supposed to casualties in the missiles or casualties in the radar, or induced casualties in consoles, or something doesn't go right, that it's out of sequence, so we know what to react. It's instinctive when we go for a real mission. We probably did upwards of 150 to 170 practice runs over about a 2-week period where we really intensify the trains.
And we started getting into really practicing the event over and over again. And anything that could go wrong, we tested for. Dud missiles, a system, spy radar dropping track, all sorts of different variations. We had gone through hundreds of different scenarios over and over again.
We had a lot of training crammed into a small amount of time. Every time the satellite would come around, we would be there on station, watching in certain locations all over the Pacific. Even when we were ashore, we were still doing drills and rotations, just trying to get all of the unknown factors we could into the known category.
For over a month, the Aegis weapon systems and the missile modifications had been done in strict secrecy, along with crew retraining and rehearsals. Then, on February 14th, with everything in place, the U.S. government went public with the Shootdown plan.
Today, we're reaching out to all countries and various organizations, the UN, some of its subordinate agencies, the European Space Agency, and NATO, to inform them of the actions that we're describing to you today.
We wanted to be open because we wanted to explain and take our allies and take nations around the world through the logic that we went through as to why this was important to go do.
We believe that the window for this activity will start here in the next 3 or 4 days and will be open for about maybe as many as 7 or 8 days.
Something that we needed to do to try to mitigate the threat from that very highly toxic fuel to folks on the ground. And this could have come back in anywhere. This could have come back in over the United States. It could have come back in over Europe, over Asia. Any of those nations could be put at risk of this. So the nature of this was global. The nature of this was international.
Almost anything that we can do with this turns out to be either neutral or better. Neutral is if we miss, nothing changes. So there is almost nothing we can do here that makes it worse. Almost everything we can do technically makes it better, which was a very strong factor waiting the decision.
With the world community now aware of the mission, the focus turned to where the shoot-down attempt would take place, in the Pacific northwest of Hawaii.
A lot of it was driven by the vast number of sensors available to us at the Pacific Missile Test Range as far as radars, visual optical sensors. That also was where the SBX radar, the X-band radar that was afloat, was near. It gave us connectivity we needed to do command and control very robustly. The other issue, not only hit the hydrazine tank, but minimize the effects of the debris. When you look at that, the first few orbits after intercept were the greatest risk of the debris coming down on those first few orbits. Most of those orbits were over water post-intercept or really sparsely populated areas of the Earth. So that was another major consideration for doing the intercept there. The other issue, why do the intercept off Hawaii, was because the satellite was cold. It never activated. And because we have an infrared seeker, that's not good. So we wanted to get an ascending orbit where where we got the effects of the sun heating the satellite and maximizing that illumination before it headed out of the sun's effect, and get the intercept there.
With the Lake Erie ready, over a dozen agencies throughout the military, the government, and industry also prepared for the mission. U.S. Strategic Command, STRATCOM, based at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, would oversee the mission with support from across the country. The Joint Space Operations Center at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, would coordinate space-based sensor tracking for the intercept. The Army-led Joint Integrated Missile Defense Team in Colorado Springs, Colorado, would use large ground-based radars and telescopes to observe the mission. In mid-February, the window of opportunity for the shoot-down attempt was nearing. Each day there would be one window of opportunity for the launch, lasting for no more than 10 to 15 seconds. Which means the Lake Erie would have to be poised and ready at exactly the right place at the right time, with conditions near to perfect, to take a shot sure to be watched around the world. That day would be Wednesday, February 20th. On the morning of February 20th, 2008, the USS Lake Erie left Pearl Harbor, Hawaii to shoot down an out-of-control satellite before it crashed to Earth. The ship's Aegis anti-ballistic missile system had been reconfigured for the task. 2 specially modified SM-3 interceptors had been loaded aboard, and its crew had rehearsed the mission. Meanwhile, the military's network of sensors for tracking the satellite was on alert.
We had sensors from Massachusetts to New Mexico to California to Hawaii, all engaged in this. We had folks, of course, deployed across the entire United States to be able to affect this as well.
With the satellite traveling 17,000 miles an hour, 3 times faster than a missile, the Lake Erie could not rely on its own radar system to launch the interceptor.
By the time the ship's radar was able to detect the satellite would have been passed and the interceptor couldn't catch it. So we had to inject off-board information into the ship's fire control system to be able to affect the intercept. What that allowed us to do was to fire the interceptor well before the ship's radar saw that. And then be able to guide the final guidance to the target using the ship's radar. But even if the ship's radar was not able to pick it up, we still could have used that off-board information to affect the intercept.
One other factor determined the timing of the attempt. The Space Shuttle Atlantis was nearing the end of its mission. The shootdown was delayed until the spacecraft landed to prevent any debris from the satellite striking it. As an added precaution, a quick response team was ready to help deal with hydrazine or any debris wherever either might fall.
We formed a task force of professionals from all over the United States, DOD and interagency, and U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Transcom, provided us with 4 C-17 Globemaster aircraft to stage the gear. The team was put on a 1-hour timeline to recall and could deploy anywhere in the world within an hour if a country had requested that capability.
Aboard the USS Lake Erie, even among sailors not directly involved with the mission, there was a sense of urgency.
One of my division officers, great young ensign, was thinking about taking leave, and he came to me one day and said, I don't want to take leave anymore. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, we're about to go save the world, and I want to be on board for it. So he didn't have any idea what was going on, but he knew it was big, and that was the feeling of a lot of the crew.
The countdown began 10 hours before launch from STRATCOM mission headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska.
And it's just like preparing for any other type of major event. You're double checking, you're cross checking to make sure that everything you've got is correct. And then at about 45 minutes prior, when everything is green, all the systems are go, the checklist is continuing, the ships are happy, everything is coming together.
By mid-afternoon, the satellite came around the Earth on its final orbit.
We had a track on it, and we knew that from that point, it was going to be showtime.
As confident as the mood was, during the countdown, Rear Admiral Hicks still endured a moment of doubt.
A lot of us in the military used to looking for Murphy. You know, Murphy's going to come up with a wild card, throw a monkey wrench into everything. We kept wondering, what is that? What's going to come up? I was very confident we could hit the satellite. What I was concerned about was hitting the satellite in the precise spot.
There were 2 modified missiles aboard the Lake Erie and a narrow window of opportunity to execute the mission.
We wanted the redundancy of a second missile in case we either missed or we hit it in the wrong spot, because we were really going for the tank, obviously.
If the Lake Erie missed the satellite with the first shot, it would likely have to wait a day to try again. But the longer the wait, the more difficult it would be to shoot down the satellite as it gathered speed, falling towards the Earth. By 4:30 p.m. local time, the Lake Erie is in position and awaits word from the U.S. Secretary of Defense to proceed.
Everything is coming together. Then you can sit there and maybe hold your breath for a little bit, or take a breath for a couple minutes and realize the gravity of what you're attempting to do.
The message had come across that the Secretary had given the go-ahead on the mission and given us weapons release authority.
Now, the moment of truth, to see whether 6 weeks of preparation and training will pay off.
like you're sitting in your living room watching a television set and a train goes by with the horn going. It vibrates extensively, especially with a missile of this size, and it's extremely loud.
The launch is successful. The SM-3 ascends skyward at 5,000 miles per hour.
166 seconds. Break.
Below deck, there's over 2 minutes to go before the crew will know anything.
And that's the longest, probably 2.5, 3 minutes of your life is when you're waiting there.
Then it all kind of sank in that we're not done yet. We need to let that eagle fly out and see what happens.
Oh, it's got it. I think it's got it.
Seconds to go before knowing if they've hit the target, but longer still before knowing if they succeeded in their mission. When satellite shootdown returns. On February 20th, 2008, the USS Lake Erie was northwest of Hawaii on a special mission. At 4:30 p.m. local time, the cruiser fired a modified SM-3 missile toward a satellite in a decaying orbit above the Earth and carrying a half-ton of toxic fuel. A network of sensors spanning 7 time zones monitored the launch, including stations in Morristown, New Jersey, Huntsville, Alabama, and Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Everything's got to go right at this point. You know, the radar's got to track, the missile as it comes out of the launcher, the fins have to open up correctly, it has to transition from boost, third stage rocket motor has to light off, and so you're constantly monitoring the flight as it goes, as well as looking at the radar track.
3 minutes after launch, the 4-stage SM-3 was into the atmosphere, guided by radar data from the ship. Rear Admiral Douglas McLean was in Omaha, Nebraska, part of the team at Stratcom overseeing the mission.
We got the missile was away, and then it was just trying to see what sensors were feeding data.
The missile moved through its first 3 stages. In the terminal phase, the kinetic warhead would seek out the satellite and try to lock onto it.
The seeker head had about 15 to 20 seconds to lock on and guide to the dead satellite. It's tumbling in a 3-axis tumble, and if you can just think of a school bus tumbling through space, we had to hit that school bus pretty much 1/3 the way down from the front bumper and engage that hydrazine tank at 22,000 miles per hour.
Here it comes. It's looking.
It's got it.
It's looking. It's looking. Oh, it's got it. I think it's got it.
KWJ. Time to intercept, 23 seconds.
Everybody was huddled around it, especially in the last terminal phase of the missile.
Come on, baby. Come on. Lock, lock.
A bunch of us were watching the kinetic warhead video that downlinked from the warhead itself. Normally we're used to that 15 to 20 seconds of seeing those final frames.
Then, it happened.
I got a glimpse of it, but and then I looked at the radar and I could just tell it was, you know, right between the goalposts, and it was just incredible.
And I was paying attention to my A-scope, and instantly there was just clutter. I knew right off the bat that it was success. I knew that we had hit the satellite.
Sensor data confirmed the missile had hit the satellite. The force of the collision was like a 10-ton truck slamming into a wall at 600 miles an hour. But the mission wasn't over.
Then it was a question of, did we hit it in the right spot?
Did we hit where we wanted to hit? Did we hit the tank?
And it took several hours after that to look at all the different data that we had.
Proof the hydrazine tank was destroyed would come in several ways. Lieutenant General Obering monitored the mission from his office near Washington, D.C.
We were looking for a very distinctive spread pattern on those range radars that indicate a wide dispersal of debris from the hydrazine. We were looking in our electro-optical sensors to see whether we had a half-moon-shaped cloud that would indicate the presence of hydrazine from the intercept.
Well, I felt good about the intercept, but I wanted absolute confirmation. It's kind of like kicking a field goal in the fog. I wanted to be sure we killed the hydrazine tank. And it took us about an hour before I felt I had every data source in from all those sensors. Then it was a sense of relief.
Despite the euphoria aboard the Lake Erie, the ship prepared to move to a second site and launch another missile.
And so while all those sensors were looking, we called the bridge and said, okay, here's the next predicted point that's downrange, and let's start driving there until someone says, you don't need to drive there. So it was about 2, maybe 3 hours later, we got the call that said, we're pretty sure you hit it in the lethal spot now, so you can turn around and start heading towards Pearl.
We were able to correlate that with the other pieces of data from the aircraft and from in terms of the imagery and the spectrometry. So we were very pleased that we were able to successfully destroy the satellite.
Yet even with the satellite and the hydrazine tank destroyed, the mission was not complete.
Then the work really began after the intercept, because we started tracking all the pieces of debris. And as time went by, we became more assured that we had completely annihilated that dead satellite.
The world had watched the mission and witnessed its success. Many made their appreciation known.
So it took us a while to get back and into home port. And at that point, we were seeing the internet. People were sending us notes saying, congratulations and thanks. And I was overwhelmed, frankly, the number. It was very gratifying. 99.9% of the notes were, we're very proud of you. It's a terrific job. Way to go. And, from retired Navy personnel to other services on active duty and retired, and just regular Americans saying, hey, this is great. And so it really didn't strike us until we pulled into home port and saw the sort of reception on the crowd. The support we got from everybody was just terrific.
Yet there were critics who questioned the necessity of shooting down the satellite.
And somebody said, well, you should just let it enter naturally, had a natural reentry and let it burn off. Well, okay, understand this. I couldn't find scientists one, and I was dealing with some of the best minds in the country. I couldn't find one that said it was going to burn up because it was spherical, it was frozen. And they said, and if it lands, it would be bad. Now somebody said, well, likelihood it's going to land in water. But we couldn't be sure. It's not an exact science. If it had landed in a populated area and it had killed people, how could we have looked at anybody and said we chose to do nothing when we could have done something?
If you have the capability of stopping something from happening that has a probability of causing harm and you don't take action, then what is the regret factor? Can you live with the consequences? Can you live knowing that we decided to do nothing for either political reasons or for diplomatic reasons?
Some suggested the mission was intended to warn China and other nations of the U.S. military's anti-satellite capability.
We did not demonstrate this capability to show anyone that we had an anti-satellite capability. We engaged that dead satellite to mitigate the risk, of course, to humans on the Earth.
People do ask me, hey, this was, you now have an anti-satellite capability. No, we don't. We took the modifications off the ships once they pulled into port. We took the missiles back to Raytheon. They're actually already been modified to return to the fleet as a ballistic missile configuration. Those software mods are gone. There's not a on-the-shelf capability. We have an understanding of what it takes now, but it's not a standing capability.
Debris tracking continued following the shootdown.
As we tracked the space debris, we could not find a piece that was bigger than the size of a football, maybe the size of your hand. We thought for sure in the first couple of orbits, most of it would come down in about 2 orbits. And we tracked some pieces, but we have still not had a report of any of the space debris making it to the ground, which tells you that it was small enough pieces that Earth's atmosphere burned it up on re-entry. By the end of 2008, there will be no more space debris. So a pretty big accomplishment that we can engage that satellite and have all the debris down inside 12 months.
The success of the mission proved the Aegis weapon systems and the SM-3 interceptor were adaptable. But it also proved what a unified effort from the military, government, and the defense industry could achieve in a short time.
I still can't describe the awesomeness of all the talent, all the people, all the resources that were involved in this, but how quickly it all came together. We executed the mission, and it's just phenomenal.
It was an incredible amount of work by an awful lot of people, an awful lot of great minds, spent an awful lot of late nights all over America, planning this thing, executing it, looking at it from all the different directions, leaving politics and everything else out. They took an amazing system and made it one of a kind for a brief moment. And I'm proud of all of them. I was very proud to be a part of that team.
As I look back on the operation, we went from a standing start to being able to accomplish this mission in a little over 6 weeks, which is dramatic in today's environment. I was asking questions and I was demanding answers that would normally take a year or more, it seemed like, to be able to get, and I was getting that in a matter of days. Just an incredible team effort. It was very proud to be a part of such a dynamic and talented team. I don't think that any challenge cannot be met by the technology and by the talent of the American people when we put our minds to do something.